let's go ahead and talk a little bit more in detail about what the West's response may be. We already know, Biden has said we are going to levy extreme sanctions. I was reading this morning about what some of that could look like. Now, I will say that as much as we would love for the West to be totally unified, there are reports this morning that there's, a lot of haggling behind the scenes. Italy wants a carve-out for luxury goods. Belgium wants a carve-out for diamonds. I mean, every country, trying to protect their own little piece of the pie. But what we could expect is, first of all, that Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Oh, it's dead.
Totally dead. Not happening. Okay, I think that seems pretty clear. We already had one Russian bank that effectively was taken offline in terms of the global system. U.S. officials emphasized to AP that Washington could take more of Russia's banks offline with basically a push of a button. We've already had a number of individuals who are high level in the Russian government who have been directly sanctioned. You could expand that list to include more high level officials. One other avenue that's available is sectoral sanctions as an option to damage the economy. That could apply to specific Russian firms. We're talking energy, finance, technology. That would be included on the sectoral sanctions identifications list, would limit trade significantly while still allowing some transactions. And of course, the big thing that has been contemplated is cutting Russia out of the SWIFT financial system. So that would effectively, cut them off from the global economy. It would significantly damage Russia's economy. It would keep them from being able to move money bank to bank around the globe, and could cut them off from international financial transactions, including international profits from their oil and gas production. And another couple of options that are on the table is denying them the ability to clear dollars with the Federal Reserve or to clear exports. That's the sort of move that we have made against, say, like Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Syria. Those sanctions, some package of them put together would truly make Russia a pariah state. Now, I would say, listen, you can't witness this unprovoked war and not respond. That being said, we know the way that sanctions on countries that impact civilians directly have not been particularly effective at ultimately bringing countries into line. So that's always something to keep in mind. The other piece of this that I think is really important is, I think sometimes with our, American hubris, we think we get to have the last say.
Right.
If we levy extreme sanctions, which we're very likely to do now, Russians have, significant cyber capabilities as well. They are going to have a response. And so that's when you get into this extremely dangerous back and forth situation, like you said. Right. It's always the most critical question in foreign affairs is, and then what? So the Russians are about to find out their and then what after invading Ukraine in this incredibly aggressive, all-out manner. What is that going to do to them? And then we're going to have to watch and wait and see what their response is. And then you're in this tit-for-tat back and forth that no one can predict where it's ultimately going to end. So it is an extraordinarily dangerous situation for the entire planet.
It's incredibly dangerous, Krystal. I'm looking right now at the OEC data on Russia itself. It imports $238 billion worth of goods, 21st in the world out of 225 nations. Top imports are cars, packaged medicaments, vehicle parts, broadcasting equipment, planes, helicopters, and spacecraft. Most of that comes from China, but Germany, Belarus, the United States, and Italy are all its top trading partners. You can essentially say goodbye to a lot of the U.S. trade, Italy and Germany as well. That is itself, I just described, $50 billion, 1/5 of all of their imports, which are now imperiled. So China can make up some of that, but to be honest, it's going to be still a complete disaster. And just to get back to what we were saying in terms of the Western response, I mean, remember this too, which is Russiagate, which you and I condemned, has already created the conditions in which to maximally respond to this from the West. We have some tape of Speaker Nancy Pelosi speaking on this yesterday. Let's take a listen.
To see, in this day and age, a tyrant roll into a country This is the same tyrant who attacked our democracy in 2016. This is the same tyrant who is opposed to democracy and wants to minimize, trivialize it, to downgrade it in the eyes of the Russian people. This is a very evil move on the part of Vladimir Putin. He's a KGB guy who happens to be probably the richest man in the world because of his exploitation of his own people that he doesn't want them to know about, and uses excuses like it's changed. Every time you hear him say, well, they're part of us, that's who we are, they should be us. Now they're saying, well, we have to go in because they want to be part of NATO. This, my friends, is our moment. This is the Sudetenland. That's what people were saying there.
Yeah, classic. Everything has to be the Sudetenland. I mean, look, I know that it's a horrific situation, but not everything is Hitler. And unfortunately, we don't seem to be able to understand that. And there still remains a significant role for the United States in order to decide how it's going to respond. Because like you said, you think the Russians are going to sit by and let their economy get crippled? No, we're going to see some sort of escalation. We could see also, don't forget this, we have troops right up near Belarus and all throughout the Baltics, Romania as well. We could see, confrontations there, North Sea and the Baltic Sea. We have military overflight there all the time, just like we did during the Cold War. Elsewhere in Syria and elsewhere where Russians have forward deployed troops, we also have people. There could be real problems there. Don't put it outside the realm of possibility in terms of how the Gray War responds.
Well, because, and this is why I so object to the casual use of Chamberlain and Munich and Hitler and Sudetenland. It's because if Putin is literally Hitler,
then it's time to go.
Then go to war. I mean, that's the next logical step. And so if you're Pelosi or if Biden used that kind of rhetoric, and I think Biden, I have to give him credit for strong rhetoric, but not saying these sorts of insane
and always
things.
Ruling out U.S. troops
and
involved.
Consistently from the beginning, and that is really important, saying even in the most extreme situations of having to rescue our own people, we are not going to do it. And that matters a lot because you open the door a crack and all of these generals and deep state types, I mean, you think they don't want to push us back into actual boots on the ground engagement, because that's the logical next step from what Pelosi and Gingrich, I mean, we've heard so many people on both sides of the aisle using this type of language. And there is only one conclusion to come to if you really think that Putin is Hitler, and that is that, okay, it's time to go to war. That is not something that we want. That's not something the American public wants. And that is something that should be put completely off the table. And just again, to underscore what a volatile and dangerous situation we're in now, Putin already issuing threats about what they will do in response to any action. He shared a message saying, for those who may be tempted to intervene in ongoing events from the outside, he stated, anyone who tries to interfere with us, and even more so to create threats to our country, to our people, should know that Russia's response will be immediate and will lead you to such consequences as you have never experienced in your history. He continued, Russia is ready for any developments of events. All necessary decisions in this regard have been made. I hope that I will be heard. Some interpreted this just as, direct engagement in Ukraine, but he does not restrict it at all to that. So
he threatened nuclear consequences as well, reminding the world of his nuclear arsenal, Krystal.
Exactly. And of course, we saw those nuclear readiness tests just a few days ago while tensions were escalating and he was building up to this full-scale invasion. I do want to say one thing that is a little bit heartening is we do have now, of course we have the people who were in charge, the bipartisan pro-war consensus, but we do have now a bipartisan anti-war, or at least reluctant caucus that even before we got to this point had been trying to exert their influence a little bit here. Let's go ahead and put B3 up on the screen. There was a bipartisan group that wrote a letter. I mean, they shouldn't even have to do this, but this included AOC. It included Louis Gohmert. I mean,
Matt
truly,
Gaetz.
Matt Gaetz is on here. Rashida Tlaib is on here. So it really is across the board. They're urging President Biden to follow the Constitution and the law and receive authorization from Congress before involving U.S. forces in Russia-Ukraine conflict. Again, that is what the Constitution says. You shouldn't have to write a letter to demand such things. And God forbid we come to the place where Biden and the White House are actually contemplating putting troops on the ground in Ukraine. But clearly you've got a significant number of members of Congress who see that as a live possibility, enough that they want to preempt that conversation by saying, at the very least, we have to authorize this through Congress. We have to follow constitutional procedures, which is something that presidents have now been skirting administration after administration. So that's both important to see that there is a bipartisan demand that you have to follow these procedures, but it's also troubling that obviously they understand where this could potentially lead. Now, what we're more likely to see than our own boots directly on the ground, as you were laying out, Saagar, is something, again, akin to Afghanistan, where we were training the insurgents.
Very
and
possible.
we were not directly in, but we were both overtly and covertly training, arming, and very, very much involved in the insurgency there. And I think that is something that we are highly likely to see, and already, in fact, are really seeing
And
it.
even if it's not us, you think the Poles won't do it, the Estonians, the Lithuanians, the Latvians, I mean, so many more of these people. We can't forget, they have legitimate beef, and they've also been occupied also by the Russians, and they're probably the most maximal whenever it comes to what they would like to see. That's what Putin has underestimated. He truly has awoken a sleeping giant here in the West. Massive European defense budgets are coming. Do not be surprised. Given the bipartisan consensus, we'll talk a little bit more in the next block about some of the breaks within the GOP, but it's going to be, the tide of public opinion and especially of pressure in Washington is going to lead to a huge increase in our own domestic defense. I am not going to be surprised to see U.S. troops be deployed almost immediately to NATO's eastern flank and to shore all of that up. There's going to be a change in the U.S. nuclear posture. There is going to be a change in the U.S. naval posture. Mm-hmm. We have long actually been pivoting much more towards Asia, the North Sea, and around Iceland and all of that, submarine alley, all of that is coming back. And this is something, again, that is what brought us on the brink of nuclear war in the first place. And that is my great fear. And this is where Congress needs to exercise some restraint. And it's always in these most emotional times that's hardest to say, look, it's what's happening, horrible. It's a crime. Not Hitler, though. And that's exactly the same lesson. We have to remember the lessons of escalation, because if you let emotion cloud your judgment, millions will be dead within moments. We have not faced a geopolitical situation like this in a long time, especially whenever nuclear weapons were involved. And Putin's cavalier threats around nukes are really terrifying. Another thing I want to emphasize in terms of the realignment that you were talking about earlier, because this is all breaking this morning, is that the Chinese actually just called and blamed the United States for igniting this crisis. So they're very much seizing themselves upon the sides of the Russians, turning themselves into some sort of Axis power. And I say all of this, I don't want war with anybody, but it is clear that when they're going to take maximal action like this, that they are going to greenlight some sort of response from Washington, which then creates a response on their end. And if they're going to act so belligerently as we once did in Iraq, they're going to find out that you are going to have big consequences in the world stage, on public opinion, the European Union. To see British leaders and German leaders, who I frankly have always thought are weak and side players who turn themselves that way for a long time, they're reigniting in rhetoric we haven't seen, I've only read about in history books. And this is just such a horrible situation, and Washington is really going to have to decide. And I do implore and commend these congressmen who said, look, anything you do has to have a robust debate in Congress, which is what we deserve. We had that in 1940, whenever it came to the actual declarations of war and how to confront Hitler. It's how we had a big debate in this country in 1914 before World War I. We didn't have that debate, which we deserved, whenever it came to the war in Iraq. And on this one, we deserve a robust one. on how we're going to respond. We're going to be dealing with this for many years to come, Krystal.
Yeah, and
years to come.
there are no easy decisions here.
No.
How much do you hurt the Russian civilians?
Right.
What do you plan for in terms of counterattacks? What is this going to do to, the refugee crisis? What is this going to do to prices in Europe, to prices here? It's going to be a rocky and difficult road here, and we'll be feeling our way through what is truly a new world realignment. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.